Hello, and welcome to the Labor John podcast, where we read off the specials of the working class history of Philadelphia and the surrounding world. My name is Young Sam James. I'm the busboy of the program, and I'm joined today by...
I'm Gabe Christie. I guess I don't know what I would be. I'll be the greeter.
You're the maitre d', yes.
Yeah.
I'll be the busboy. And today...
Yeah, take us away.
And today, we have a very special guest, Gabe. Do not we?
We do indeed. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I guess continue with the restaurant theme. I'll be the server. My name's Katherine. I'm a former restaurant worker here in Philadelphia. And I now create content and kind of do some activism around wage theft. So yeah, that's what I'm kind of here to talk about today.
Awesome. Yeah. So you've been kind of waging a one-person campaign that's been pretty intense and fascinating to watch. But do you want to kind of explain how all of that started? And you can do it in over 3 minutes because it's not TikTok. So
I don't know if I can do that in over 3 minutes. I'm actually a Philly transplant. I moved here last April. And I was living in the Manayunk area, and I have a full-time, 9-to-5 job. But as we all know, moving is expensive AF, right? And being a millennial, those salaries are not quite so nice as like what our parents experienced at our age, right? So waiting tables was like something I'd done in the past. And so I was like, okay, like this will be nice and flexible, to like pick up as a side gig, to make some extra cash, but nothing that I, had to commit a ton of extra time and energy to. And so, I kind of hit the streets in Manayunk and picked up a job waiting tables at a local restaurant called Bernie's, right on Main Street in Manayunk. Things were going like generally pretty well. I liked my coworkers, etc. But then one day, all of a sudden, checks were late. And I was kind of like, okay, this is a bit, odd. And I was, concerned about it. But I didn't get the vibe that, some other, like, I got the vibe that maybe this wasn't the first time that had happened. And so, this happened on a Friday. Payday was every other Friday. I expressed my concern to the manager, and he was like, I think that, checks will be here on Monday. So checks did come on Monday. I was like, maybe this is like a one-time thing. Like, let me just try to like brush it off, see how things go, whatever. 2 weeks later, no check again. And then this time, not even like an estimated timeline of when I could even expect my check. Right. And followed up every day asking about my check, like either text message or going up there after a week, like no timeline still. Waged a one-woman strike, refusing to go to work until I had been compensated for the labor that I had already provided. Missed a second check, so 2 checks in a row. And then, got kind of fed up and tired of not getting my pay, and exposed my employer on TikTok. And then that got quite a lot of views in the Philadelphia area. And it did result in me getting paid, but it kind of also resulted in me like figuring out that this was habitual for this one, restaurant owner. And he practices this at the time he owned 3 other restaurants in the suburbs, and it was something that they were experiencing as well. And I was like, wow. I was just so shocked by that. And so that was like the start of my journey, basically.
Wow. Yeah.
So it wasn't an isolated incident. Other workers were also having the same problems, you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, like I, remember like overhearing a conversation early when I first started, and now looking back, I'm like, this was definitely a red flag, but a manager, showing up to work one day and her check had bounced. Right. And like at that time I was getting paid, but I'm like, your check bounced, like, really? You know what I mean? And yeah, once I exposed my employer on TikTok, I got a lot of DMs and comments from current workers at other restaurants, former workers at either the restaurants that were currently operational or restaurants that had previously been operational and shut down, indicating that like very similar thing, like checks not arriving, checks bouncing. I mean, food vendors that started refusing to take checks and would only accept cash, like that kind of thing. Yeah, like it's like, oh, okay, so this is how he does like business, like this is his MO.
And this was before all of the Workers United organizing too. So like even before the Starbucks and cafe organizing throughout the city. So there wasn't like any organization fighting for restaurant workers at the time, was there? In any form?
There's Rock United that fights for restaurant workers, but and that I've like hooked up with them and I've been like collaborating with them since like last summer. They don't specifically do like unionizing, but they do help fight like wage theft and sexual harassment and all that. And they are specifically for restaurant workers. They were actually founded in New York in the aftermath of 9/11, because there was a restaurant at the top of one of the towers. And all those, a lot of those people died, but a lot of them were out of work like overnight and, didn't have a support system, like that kind of thing. And I don't want to tell their story because that's theirs to tell, but, so there are organizations out there, but I think like you have to know that those exist. But I think also too, in the restaurant industry, sometimes there's a lot of abuse. Like there's a lot of, you have bad managers who are verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, like dealing with customers is great, but also is very emotionally taxing. And sometimes you get a little bit jaded, or maybe this isn't your first time experiencing wage theft and you're like, this is just the industry. It's shitty, but like, it is what it is. And you just like, you quit and you move on, or you deal with it. You know what I mean? But I'm kind of like, why does this have to be like the default? Like, why do we have to put up with this type of behavior, not knowing like when our check's gonna come? I was in a position where, again, that wasn't money that I was using toward my livelihood. It was extra income, but most of the people up there, that was their livelihood. And I'm like, how scary is that to like not know when your check's gonna come? You know what I mean? And you've got how do you know what bills to pay? How do you know whether to pay your rent or your car payment, or you know what I mean? I'm not here to bash the restaurant industry. Like it's a tough job. You're on your feet. It's long hours. Like it's late nights. It's early mornings. Like it can be very rewarding, and it definitely has its pros, but like any job, it has its cons too. Like sometimes customers are amazing and you have great experiences with customers and deep relationships. And other times like they're not so great, but that's obviously working with the public in any capacity, but definitely. It's a tough job to be constantly like on, right? You don't really get that kind of break, like my regular job is basically behind a computer. So when I'm not in a meeting, I don't have to have that like on personality where I'm, like constantly like, what do you need? What do you need it? I can just be like at my computer focused on one particular task. You know what I mean? So I get a little bit of that like mental break.
It's like you're on mentally and physically. You're on your feet and you're trying to deal with customers and everything going on, trying to remember orders. Yeah.
You're running around, you're trying to like remember, like if you have 7 tables and you're trying to remember like who's had their entree, who's had their appetizer, who needs extra ketchup, like who needs another drink, like, it's definitely exhausting work. And then to not get your check, and that just makes you feel so not appreciated and not valued. You know, it really shows you that like the owner, the manager, whoever's in charge of payroll truly like doesn't value their employees if, you know, if they're like not concerned about paying their workers for, you know, the labor that they've already given you. You know what I mean? Like you're not fronting them money, which whatever the system is, you still should be paid for your labor. But like, this is labor I've already given you. And the agreement wasn't that this was a volunteer role. Like the agreement was that you were going to pay me and this is my livelihood, you know? And to be just like utterly unconcerned about that is just ridiculous.
Yeah. I just want to set up like the scenario of your work. I always said, like, there's some countries that mandate military service for every citizen. I feel the same way about everybody should work retail or they should work in the restaurant business for a year or so that they can be on the other side of the coin.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely offers you perspective, right? When you have a newfound appreciation when you go out to dinner or you go get a drink or, you know, you go shopping or something like that. You do have a newfound appreciation for that person on the other side, the worker, right? And the work that they're doing, for sure.
Definitely.
It's just interesting, like, you know, the restaurant industry, which is, of course, where I experienced wage theft. It's not really like a valued role in the like American, you know, society and culture.
Definitely.
Like, you know, it's more valued in other cultures, but in American culture, at least like your kind of bottom tier workers, like your server, your dishwasher, your line cook, like, you know, it's not seen as this like career industry role or something you should strive towards or something like that. You know what I mean? And I'm sure like that plays a role into the devaluing of these people as people. And then also, you know, well, they experience wage theft. That sucks, but you know, it is what it is.
I mean,
you know,
just
or let it roll off your back that you didn't pay your workers, you know?
Yeah. But just because you're using it as supplementary income doesn't mean that it's any less of a good job or something you should be doing for multiple years. People.
Yeah.
My mom has been a waitress for 40, 50 years. And mostly because she loves the people. She loves people. She loves talking to people. You know?
Yeah. I mean, I picked it up because it is a good job. It's flexible, right? Yeah. Like you can work 1 shift or 5 shifts. Like it's really easy to work around a very structured, like 9 to 5 job. You know what I mean? You can work night shift. You can work brunch. Like, you know, it's quick money too. Like, you know, you get your job and you start tomorrow basically, you know, and then you get paid in like 2 weeks versus, you know, the more kind of office corporate culture, which is again, like my regular job, you got to go through, you know, a whole hiring process and it takes 2 to 3 months to even start the job. Yeah. And then, you know, there's all these strict rules around when you can work and how long, when, you know, how often you can work and this, that, and the other. And the restaurant industry is just, it's not really like that, you know? So, yeah, I mean, that's exactly why I picked it up, you know?
Not that this really makes a difference. I'm just asking mostly because I'm interested, because my restaurant experience comes from the pizza delivery side and food and delivery side. Rather than in-house work. But when were your tips cashed out at the end of the night or pulled into your paycheck that was then late?
So cash tips I could take home, but credit card tips were pulled into my paycheck. And this is like an interesting thing that I learned after I exposed my former employer on TikTok, was that because this was, you know, happening at other restaurants, like some of these restaurants would start doing this kind of policy where they do like a 10% discount if you paid in cash. So in order to encourage the customers to pay cash, and then they'd have more cash in house to be able to pay workers what their back owed wages in cash because they weren't getting checks, you know what I mean? And it would just become such this thing that like workers are obviously complaining about, as they should. And the manager's like, there's nothing I can do because payroll comes from the owner in that restaurant structure specifically, like at Bernie's, payroll came from the owner. And so if the owner didn't deliver checks, the manager had nothing to give the workers. And so the only thing that they could potentially do was to try to get more customers to pay with cash and pay their workers, from that cash. But I mean, even still, like, you're not going to be able to, that's not sustainable to pay everybody, right? I mean, if you've got 50 workers at your restaurant and they, people are owed $1,000, $2,000, right, for their missing pay times 50 people, like, that's a lot of money. And so you're not, like, just because, like, unless your restaurant is really doing like a lot of business, to get like $100,000 in cash in house, like, you could maybe give like back of the house potentially like most of their pay, and then servers and bartenders maybe their tips, but not like their hourly, right? Whatever that would come out to be. So
yeah, and then that also you need to have like at least a good week in order to pay your workers if you're doing it all in cash. Whereas they're owed the money regardless.
That amount of money.
Yeah. But I guess getting slightly back on topic.
Sorry about that.
Any of this was actually off topic.
I just wanted to build the background, because we haven't talked really about the restaurant business. So just to have that, create that scenario of what it's like. So thank you for that, Catherine.
But there was a larger strike at Bernie's, correct?
Yeah.
So can you give a little background on that?
Yeah. So this is what happened. So I went on my strike. Okay, so I missed a check on like July the 8th, 2022. And then I typically only worked weekends. So that gave me a bit of a buffer to wait it out and see if I was going to get paid before I had to kind of commit to going on strike. So that was like a Friday. And by the next Thursday, I still didn't have my check. And so I was like, okay, I'm not showing up to work. Right. And then a week later was another payday. And that was like July 22nd or something like that. And so we didn't get checks that day either. And then that Saturday, the manager texted me and said, like, we're on strike. And I was like, who's we? And he's like, the whole restaurant. Like, I called Eric, the owner, and let him know, like, we're not opening up until everyone gets paid. Like, apparently I wasn't there when this happened because I was on my own one woman strike, but supposedly like the chef and like the line hooks and like the back of the house like walked out because they were fed up, which as they should. And so they went on strike. And what's fascinating is that the same day, Bernie's, there was two other Bernie's locations. There's one in Glenside and one in Hatboro. Mm-hmm. Glenside also went on strike that same day. Now, I don't know that story in terms of like how many checks they were missing and all that, but they went on strike. They put a sign in the window that said that they were closed due to like unfair labor practices. Like, it was, very like calling out the owner basically for being shitty. And so when my location called the owner and said, hey, we're on strike, he was like, okay, don't tell anybody. Just like put a sign that says we're closed. And if anybody asks, say like kitchen renovations or something like that. Well, Glenside got paid 3 hours later, and then they were reopened for business that same day. And then Bernie's Manayunk didn't get paid until like that Thursday, basically. I got paid on Tuesday, and there was some checks there when I went to pick up my checks. But then I got like a message in like the scheduling app on like Thursday, and it was their the owner's like right-hand man, and it was like sorry for the delay. Everyone should be paid out by now. Like, hopefully, like, this won't happen again, kind of thing. And then they were reopened that weekend.
Okay.
And so it's just like fascinating that clearly this owner like very much cares about public opinion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it was like that my TikTok motivated me to get paid in full, right? I posted it on a Monday. So the second missed check was on a Friday, like the 22nd. Saturday was when the whole restaurant went on strike. Monday, I still had no updates. And I was like, I'm mad, you know, and I posted on TikTok. And Tuesday, the owner texted me and was like, oh, your wages are being brought down. Like, I'm, you know, I want to offer to have a conversation, whatever, you know? So it's like, okay, he cares very much about what the public thinks about him, but he really doesn't care that much about actually paying his workers. You know, he's only motivated when his public image is potentially being threatened.
Interesting.
But even that, like, that's admitting a weakness that the you guys can then take advantage of.
Yeah, exactly. Which, you know, like I've kind of continued to do by calling him out on TikTok. Not as much. One of the reasons kind of just being that like he did have 4 locations and 3 of them are now closed. So he only has 1. So there's obviously like a lot less wage theft and stuff happening. But I also want to focus on the broader picture of wage theft overall. And I don't want anybody to assume that like it's only him, you know, committing wage theft. Like he definitely is doing it. I'm sure I would assume he's still doing it, but you know, it's like systemic across the industry overall, you know what I mean? And it's a problem that needs to be fixed broadly across the industry. And if we can solve that problem, he'll get caught up in the sweep. You know what I mean?
I guess we should also, for anyone listening that doesn't know this already, which our entire audience should know this at this point, that discussing workplace issues and pay with both yourself and other coworkers is a federally protected right. So
as well as striking for unfair labor practices, depending upon what type of worker you are. So, you know, that's, you know, I think like too, like managers are in a hard spot. Like, even if they're not buying into the whole wage theft thing, like if it's from the owner down, like they don't have the same protections to strike and all of that. So then they're between a rock and a hard place. Like they want to keep their job. They don't agree with what's happening, but they don't have access to, you know, they may not have access to like restaurant bank accounts to just like pay workers, but then they don't want to, you know, piss off the owner and get fired, etc. So I want to at least acknowledge like the complexity that managers can be in if they are not, you know, a willing participant in the wage theft. And
we've been seeing that a lot with the Starbucks and cafe unionizations that while Starbucks hasn't been willing to obey any labor law, they have when they slightly obey labor law, they do it by just firing the managers at organized stores rather than all of the organized staff.
Yeah. It's like making an example out of the manager, right? Like we can't fire you, the servers or the baristas. Let me back up because we're talking about Starbucks. The baristas, because you're trying to unionize and that's protected action, but as a manager, you don't have the same rights. And so we're going to take advantage of that and, you know, basically threaten the baristas by firing managers that are complicit in the process, right? So like they're not necessarily actively participating because, again, that's not protected action for someone who's a manager, but they're not out there trying to union bust either, you know?
You've been getting more and more active on social media, waging your little personal war here. But what's your experience been with doing all of your like TikTok interviews, I think in Rittenhouse Square? And like getting out and talking to the public about this?
That's been interesting. You know, it really shines a light that like most people have no idea what wage theft is. They have no idea that like beyond like the definition of wage theft, but like they have truly no idea that it even occurs. And then also trying to put it into perspective, like for them to understand, like, not only does it happen, but like it truly is systemic. Like if you look at the Department of Labor, like low wage, high violation industries, like the restaurant industry is number one, and like Economic Policy Institute did a study a couple years ago, and they estimate that workers lose $50 billion per year due to wage theft. Like, and that's a lot of money. And so, like they often don't know what it is. And then I like explain it to them and they're kind of shocked. Like they're like, oh, wow, I had actually no idea that even happens in the world, which I honestly can't really blame them because I didn't know that either until it happened to me. I had just been in this like position where I had always, like every time I'd worked in the restaurant industry, I had good quality like managers and owners, and I'd always been paid timely with a beautiful check and a pay stub and everything, taxes deducted, etc., which I can't say is the same for Bernie's. And like, then I go to Bernie's and I'm like, what is this? This is not what I'm used to, like at all. You know what I mean? And it wasn't until it happened to me and then I subsequently did the research around it that I understood how common it actually is. And I was like, I guess I've just been lucky that, it's never happened to me before.
Yeah. I think it's just like a lot of people who work like me, who work salary. You work 2 weeks, you get paid direct deposit. You don't have to think about it. So they don't think about it.
With me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same with me. Like my day job is a salary job. Like I get paid like twice a month, like I know that I don't have to question that money is going to get deposited into my bank account, right? Like I don't have to consciously consider what I'm spending money on because I may not get my check in, next month or in 2 weeks or whatever, right? And I don't want to say that the restaurant industry is all bad. Like there's certainly some good actors in there, but $50 billion a year, like that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of missing money. Yeah.
That's yeah. And for the restaurant industry to be the number one, like low wage, high violation in the Department of Labor's eyes, like that says a lot,
And because we are at least ostensibly a labor history podcast, I do want to bring up the one of our episodes was on an early, like basically the first factories that got set up in Philly, actually in what is now Manayunk. And but the owner of the factory kept having to deal with strikes because he kept running out of money to pay people and wouldn't pay them. And then they just stopped working. So then he started paying them by giving them pocketbooks, as in like short novels. And we don't know this for sure, but the theory was that like you would get these short novels and then you would go and pawn them, and that was your wages. But it's good to know that like these systems really haven't changed that significantly, and that was in the 1790s that was happening.
Yeah, so, that's super bizarre. We didn't even get anything to pawn, right? It was just like, sorry.
Yeah, and I just getting back to Bernie's, I also didn't think about the fact that having one store in Manayunk and then two in Montgomery County also changes labor laws, and I think and the like paid medical leave law in Philly, but that not applying to any of the other stores. And
and then like Philly has sick leave too, right? And that like what is does the state have sick leave? And so it gets a little bit complicated. And then like, for example, like technically in order for like the federal DOL to investigate your employer has to meet like a certain gross revenue per year, but like how are you as a worker supposed to know what your own, like what the owner is making in gross revenue? Like I don't know, like
especially when it's held by another company.
Tax returns for Bernie's, like publicly, like what? Like I have no idea what the gross revenue is. Like I can tell you, there's 4 stores. I can tell you approximately how many people work at my location. Like that's kind of what I like. That's what I can tell you. You know?
Yeah, and because Bernie's is owned by another company too, that like you don't have, or I'm assuming you didn't have any connection or interaction with, like Highland something group.
Highland Hospitality LLC, yeah. So that's like technically the name of the LLC. Like it's all like one guy, Eric Kretschmann is his name. And he's kind of a local. He's been around like Bucks County and Montgomery County for a while. But like I don't know enough about LLCs, but it, feels a little bit like a scam to me to be like constantly creating a new LLC and then opening up a new restaurant. And then that restaurant like gets shut down. And then you open up a new LLC and then you open up a new restaurant and it's like on and on and on. You know what I mean?
Sounds like there's a pattern there.
Yeah. He used to have a location, Hops in Brewery Town. And I got, through like exposing him on TikTok, I got connected with some of the workers there. And like right before the pandemic shut everything down, he got evicted from that place. But like nobody knew until they showed up for work that day and the doors were locked and they couldn't get in, like, because the landlord had changed the locks. So like the manager's keys didn't work and people had personal possessions inside, etc. And like for weeks he was like, we're gonna like reopen, everything's gonna be fine, and on it went, like stringing these workers along. And meanwhile, like they hadn't gotten paid, and like several of them had filed wage theft complaints and like hadn't heard anything. And I got connected with them in summer of 2022, so this is 2 years later, and several of them had not been paid. And I was like, that is like insane that like all these workers from this restaurant, especially in the pandemic, didn't get their last check, but also they lost their jobs, like, with no notice, like at all.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And then like he owned a Bernie's in University City and was evicted from that location. Penn was his landlord. And he was sued and evicted from that place. So yeah.
And then because that job loss predated the pandemic emergency, they weren't eligible for the pandemic unemployment.
Well, here's the thing that goes back to wage theft, though. Like he often pays cash, and like you have no pay stubs, so you have no verification that he's paying unemployment taxes. So like if your employer is not paying unemployment taxes when you try to file for unemployment, there's no money there for you to collect.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And if you want to talk about the city government taking a while, like it can take a while for the IRS to they can sue for unpaid unemployment taxes. And like if you search him in, various court dockets, like you can see his history of being sued. And so the IRS in theory can sue, but they're not going to sue for everyone, right? Like they're going to pick and choose. Like they only have so many resources and time, and like they have to do what's in their best interest. And like, what are the cases that they feel like they can win? Or like, this person didn't pay unemployment for 5,000, but this person didn't pay unemployment for 500,000. Like, which one are you really going to go after? Right. Like you're probably going to pick this like more serious offender. Right. And so if this, if Eric doesn't fall into that category of a more serious offender, then he can kind of slip under the radar. Like it's illegal, but sure. Like it's, unless someone's truly actively like pursuing this case against you, like it doesn't really matter that it's illegal because you're getting away with it.
Yeah. And then unless you can organize it into a class action thing, it's also just going to be each individual claimant. So it's not going to be that much money, no matter
right. And
how you
also
split
still takes a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
Like to file a class action and for it to go to court and all that. And then too, like we're talking about low wage workers, right? So the resources to hire an attorney and file a class action lawsuit. There's obviously entities like Community Legal Aid, and they will help you with wage theft, but they have income restrictions though. So if you don't meet their income restrictions, then you're not eligible to use them as a service. So yeah, so it's like really I can totally see like a world where not even a world, I can totally see where workers feel like they have no options, right? When this is what they're going through.
So I'm going to try and end this on a slightly cheerier note. I just wanted to ask, like, because you've been agitating for a very long time. I guess what do you want to either see happen in the future, or what are your future plans? If anything that you can share without giving too much away.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I'm at that pivotal point now where like I am transitioning, my messaging away from like one bad actor to like wage theft broadly. So I think some of my goals I'm still figuring out, but I think definitely like we have to have better enforcement systems in place. And so whatever I can do to try to push the powers that be to, create more support systems and more enforcement. And there's a variety of things that could look like. And like there's a city somewhere in California, and I'm blanking on the name right now. And, if the owner of a restaurant is found guilty of wage theft, they revoke their food license. So they can't even operate as a restaurant. Now, like that, the hard part of that is that it does harm the worker because it shuts the restaurant down. But it also like really would motivate someone to like not commit wage theft because, if they're found guilty, like they get shut down, right? San Diego just made it a felony for you to commit wage theft at $1,500 or higher, and it used to be a misdemeanor. And I'm not saying I'm a proponent of putting people in jail, but like, I would be curious to see how does that, it's a newer thing. So I'm just curious to see like how that works out. You know what I mean? Does that decrease the occurrences of wage theft? So I think we can look and see like what are some other things that are happening across the country and what's working and how we might implement that here in Philly, but also everywhere else. You know what I mean? Like I'd love to see that $50 billion number not be $50 billion,
Yeah.
Maybe, I mean, it would be amazing if we could eradicate wage theft. I'm also realistic and it would probably never happen. But like, if we could just make it like 10 times better, like I think that would be amazing. And so in a dream world, it would be to like seriously diminish the occurrences of wage theft. But like more realistically, it would be, to just see some more laws and stricter enforcement around wage theft here locally. And then, once that happens, kind of looking at a bigger scale.
Well, I don't know about you, Gabe, but I'm okay with a couple white collar criminals going to jail.
Yeah, I think if we're going to have jails, I think that's a good use for them.
Might as well use them.
I still need to read my Mao, but I know he had something to say about landlords, and that might be extended to restaurant owners. But I just wanted to say thank you for joining us.
Yes,
and it's been a pleasure. And I definitely hope that we can see some action moving on all of this, because it has, like I said, it's been going on since at least the 1790s and has arguably gotten worse, because you're right. They're not giving you anything to pawn anymore either. So
maybe that needs to be the next law that we enact. Is like, if you're going to commit wage theft, at least give them something to pawn, right?
Give them a couple Stephanie Meyer's books. Come on.
I mean, Taylor Lautner, you know, everybody loves
All right,
him.
yeah.
There you go.
I could fry an egg on that chest.
I'm going to end this now.
Let me have this.
All right.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, and after show party at Bernie's, so hope you can make it.